Today, we are talking all things electric vehicles.
As this thing grows, we must ensure that infrastructure grows with it.
I think we are tending towards a situation where it'll be faster to charge your car than it would be to actually refuel your car.
There's no oil changes typically, there's no wear and tear typically.
And the only other thing that they do in a service on an EV is change your window washer fluid.
Welcome to WTF, Westbank Talks Finance, the podcast that turns WTF moments into knowledge that you can use to make informed financial decisions. Subscribe to get notifications when we release new episodes. Hi, and welcome to Westbank Talks Finance. Today, we are talking all things electric vehicles, the topic that's really wheeling itself through our industry with very interesting things to talk about. And I am happy today to have the experts with me to really discuss this thing that's called EV, NEV. It's got different variations. I've got Greg Kress with me, who is the Principal Director of Automotive and E-Mobility at Accenture, joined by Kival Singh, who looks after sustainability and ESG at FNB. Welcome, gents.
Thank you, Lebo. Pleasure to be here.
Oh, good.
Great to be here, excited for the conversation.
Yeah. And Greg, I'm going to kick off with you. EV. You know, what is this thing? EV, what are EVs? And why is it such a thing in the automotive industry at this point in time?
Absolutely, Lebo. I think we're living in an amazing and exciting time of transformation in the world. We're seeing a convergence of an awareness around sustainability, around clean energy, but we're also at the same time seeing a huge disruption in mobility. And the two worlds are colliding. And we're seeing now over the past 10 years such breakthroughs in energy storage that it's created an opportunity for mobility to take advantage of that. So you hear the word EV and you immediately think of the word electric vehicle, potentially. Then you hear the word NEV and you think, what does that stand for? And what it actually refers to is new energy vehicle. So what that is as a term is encompasses all the types of new drivetrains and technologies that are emerging around mobility. Battery electric vehicles are just one of them. Okay. But you'll hear about hybrids and you'll hear about plug-in hybrids and you'll hear about range extender EVs. You'll hear about hydrogen fuel cell EVs. All of these terms are all collected under the term new energy vehicles.
Sure. I'm already learning a lot. I actually thought that the new is in reference to the car, not the energy. You know, so already there's this something that I'm learning there. Yeah. And Kival, over to you. Greg speaks of the different types of EVs. What are these different types of EVs? It sounds like there's quite a few.
Yeah, I think Greg has actually mentioned all of them that are currently in production in the market currently in SA. I think just looking at the market and looking at the adoption within the market and what possibly is most known to consumers out there is the hybrid vehicles. Mm-hmm. You're seeing many manufacturers come through and offer a large range of hybrid vehicles, and we're seeing that largely in the market. When we're looking at NEVs, probably that taking the most amount of market share, and then moving to sort of your EVs and your plug-in hybrids. Just to probably give some stats, if we look at this NEV market, all encompassing of what Greg has mentioned, in 2023, we had about 7,800 units sold in the market. That's roughly about 1.5% of the total new vehicle sales. So still very small.
Small, yeah.
Right? And in the first 3 quarters of 2024, there's been approximately 11,000 units sold. So already you're seeing a massive growth, although off a low base. Mm-hmm. So those percentages do seem high. So we are seeing that transition and that adoption come through in the market, yeah.
And I mean, interesting in terms of the sudden growth in that space. I just want to maybe let's go back to the different types. I hear hybrid, I hear plug-in hybrid, I hear electric. What are the real differences? Because there's clearly quite a range of them.
Yeah.
No
I think
pun intended.
I think Greg can allude to a lot of the technicalities within the components in terms of these different type of vehicles.
Let's unpack that a bit. So a hybrid vehicle is a combination of a car with a petrol tank as well as a small electric battery, very small battery. You're looking at around 3 to 4 kilowatt hours of storage. And we'll get to what that means in the next discussion. But what it basically means is the petrol tank works very much in conjunction with the battery in the vehicle, and it improves the efficiency of the vehicle by a large degree. But it can only charge through what's called self-regeneration or regenerative braking. So when you actually put your brakes on, the kinetic energy from the movement of the car is reclaimed and channeled back as electrical energy into the battery.
Sure.
So it's very much a symbiotic energy equation in a hybrid car. And they're very popular because they're affordable, and it speaks to those customers that are becoming more environmentally conscious, sustainability conscious, as well as cost conscious, because the fewer times you need to refuel, the better.
Greg, I mean, just on that point, you've got what's largely known in the market, you've got petrol and diesel.
100%.
Right?
Yep.
So on a petrol car, typically you're getting around, 6 to 800 Ks. And on a diesel car, you're more likely to get 1,000. So to try and simplify it, that hybrid vehicle is giving you efficiency in terms of that range.
Yes.
That you
And I
get.
mean,
For less fuel.
For less fuel.
less fuel. Okay, and I mean, I'm just sitting here in my mind, I'm thinking, at which point, if it's a hybrid, if it's got two of these mechanisms, which is, I mean, the internal combustion engine, the normal one that we use to petrol or diesel, and it's got the electric battery, at which point, I mean, where's the brain of the car thinking, now I can go electric, now I can go to petrol? Greg, I don't know if my question is making sense.
No, it's absolutely a valid question. What's fun about driving these vehicles is that you've got control.
Okay.
Some of these vehicles have got an electric-only mode button, so you can force the car. If you see the battery is actually fully charged, you force the car into EV mode.
Sure.
So even with a hybrid, you can drive for about 2 to 3 kilometers in pure EV mode in dead silence without using a drop of fuel, until it runs out of its little battery, and then it needs to think about recharging again. And it can recharge, as I say, from the braking or from the petrol engine itself, actually putting some energy back into the battery as well.
Sure, that sounds exciting. I mean, already I'm thinking a hybrid as something to sort of have a soft landing into this transition.
Absolutely.
Would be something that I would go for.
The plug-in hybrid is the big brother, if I can put it in those terms.
Let's talk about that one.
Because this is also quite nice, because you've got really the best of both worlds now. You've got a bigger battery. You've got around about a 20 kilowatt hour battery, which gives you an electric-only mode of around 80 to 100 kilometers without touching your fuel tank.
Sure.
So if you have a commute from home to drop off your kids at school, to the office, to groceries and back, and it's less than 80 kilometers a day, you can charge your plug-in hybrid overnight through an electrical socket and have a fully charged battery every morning, so that Monday to Friday you're only using EV.
Okay.
And then when you need that extra distance to do a camping trip on the weekend or a long distance trip, that's when the petrol engine kicks in.
Interesting.
And what's even nicer about that is that you get an extremely good fuel consumption. It goes down to like 1.5 to 2 liters per 100 Ks. To Cavell's point, gives you a range of maybe 1,200 to 1,500 kilometers using that combination of the plug-in hybrid battery and the petrol engine.
Interesting. So the plug-in essentially, Greg, has a bigger battery
Yes.
than just the normal hybrid.
That's correct.
Which gives you
That
a wider
EV mode.
range. You can
Yes.
drive for longer.
And better consumption on a longer road trip.
Ah, okay. Interesting to know these things.
I think importantly, they also, like, we'll get into a lot of the pros and cons, I suppose, later. And more so directed at EVs. But when we're looking at this plug-in hybrid options, right, we must also take into account, remember now you've got a larger battery. You still have an ICE engine. So maintenance is something that I think we'll get into those discussions around how
that looks like.
Yeah, cost-benefit analysis
Yeah.
and what does it look like for consumers out there, right?
You're obviously the numbers guy, cost-benefit analysis. And maybe let's get into that now, the pros and cons. I mean, most of us drive ICE cars, either petrol or diesel right now. Why? I mean, what are the pros and cons? Why should I go for an EV? Why shouldn't I? What are the pros and cons? I mean, there are a couple of things that go around in the industry in terms of this topic, but I want us to start right at the top. Affordability. You know, can we maybe chat about that? Why should I buy this car? What are the pros? What are the cons in terms of price?
Okay, perfect. So Lebo, I mean, let's start with the electric vehicles. Okay, I think we've established that your hybrid vehicles is a combination of both, and I think we've sort of looked at the pros there, and that being quite a nice segue into your sustainability journey. If we're looking at EVs, typically you're looking at an average purchase price brand new of around 700,000 currently in the market.
Okay.
We are seeing the second-hand market grow as we all start adopting into this into these new EVs. Typically, you can start looking at second-hand EVs approximately from around 350,000.
Okay.
Those are the smaller ones that'll typically give you a range of under 300 kilometers. And as you go up, you typically see the battery storage increase.
It's bigger.
Hence the price. Hence your price increases.
So is that the factor? Is that the relationship? The bigger the battery, the higher the cost. Am I hearing you correctly? And it's not necessarily tied to brand. Could be.
I think there's always going to be a brand play.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that exists in the market. But I mean, in terms of the technology, I think through our experience, we've seen larger batteries, larger costs.
So
Okay.
I think it's a very crucial point, Lebo. I mean, the battery is around 60% of the cost of a new electric vehicle. And as I said, it comes down to the fact that the benefits in battery technologies have really been gained in the past 10 years. And it's on a technological cycle where the costs of manufacturing and the cost of the chemistries that go into the batteries will come down over a period of time. But right now, that it is what it is in terms of its cost points, which drives the price point, irrespective of the brand. So what we're seeing is this is what's really causing the price point to be slightly higher than it would be for an ICE vehicle. In addition to that, because of the new drivetrains, we have import duties, which are also loaded onto the electric vehicles, which are largely imported into South Africa right now. That could be up to 25% versus 18% for an internal combustion engine vehicle. We also have ad valorem luxury tax, which is a sliding scale-based system, which hasn't been reviewed for a very long time and is very much overdue for a review for what the threshold is that defines what a luxury vehicle is. You even pay a portion of luxury tax vehicle when you buy a Suzuki Swift today. So that needs to be reviewed. So all of these compound negatively and unfairly, I would say, against the selling price of a new electric vehicle. But we are seeing some really positive announcements and momentum in the industry for the policymakers, for government, for the OEMs to collaborate on what it will take to firstly set up manufacturing of these EVs in South Africa for the domestic market to make it affordable, but also what will it take to create incentives and rebates and potentially attractive points for consumers to consider the new electric vehicles or the new energy vehicles as the next purchase that they make.
And I mean, what I'm hearing is that make them more accessible from a pricing point, right? I mean, you mentioned a couple of factors there in terms of affordability, and one would like to think, and you mentioned, that it's been 10 years, it's getting refined every year, so the adoption should really look better as and when the technology improves, if I'm hearing you correctly.
I mean, let's look at a little bit of history.
Okay.
Right? We don't have to go too far back. Solar, right? Rooftop solar. Okay. 2007, 2008, load shedding hit SA. We need to try and get onto solar. Panels back then, as an example, you had your 300 watt panels costing 10,000 Rand a panel, right? Today you have panels going up to 600 watts that cost 3,000 Rand a panel. So evolution and technology curve, you're always going to try and find where we are at those points. So definitely as time goes on, these prices should typically come down, or you should get more for the current price that you do pay for.
Absolutely. Now, I want to get an EV and I want to drive longer. Range anxiety, one of the things that people talk about when they think about EVs. I mean, what do you, James, have to say about that? Kival, I'll start with you. You know, your sustainability hat is on.
Look, I'll take off my sustainability hat and I'll just speak about anxiety generally, right? If you think about anything today, if you look at your phone, right? Oh no, guys, I can see this battery is being drained. I need to charge it. I know that I still have another 4 hours in the day. I still need to put my maps on, look at the traffic. I know that battery is going to be drained. Am I going to be okay?
Go on TikTok.
Okay, sure. Right? And it's exactly the same with a vehicle, with an electric vehicle. In order to combat that, you need to plan accordingly, right? With anything in life, right? Anything new, there's always going to be anxiety, right? My experience with driving those EVs, yes, I had massive range anxiety, okay? And over a period of time, again, that starts decreasing. Typically.
And what does that mean when you say it starts decreasing? Because I'm thinking...
Your anxiety decreases because you start getting used to the technology. You start getting used to understanding that there's charging points readily available. I think to date we've got about 500 charging stations, call it in the retail space, which is quite sufficient for the current adoption of EVs today.
So when you say in the retail space, maybe let's just pause there for a bit. When you say in the retail space, are you saying at malls, at businesses stationed there, which will help the planning, right?
Absolutely.
And what about if I take a trip from here to KZN or to Cape Town? You know, because you talk about planning, I can plan and all of that. Will there be enough charging stations to sustain me through that trip? I think that's the biggest thing.
Absolutely. And I think the cars are also coming out with technology today such that when you do plan your trip, it will tell you exactly where you can charge, where you should charge, and how much you should charge up to. So that is, I think the technology has advanced to get us to a point to assist us in planning. Where the anxiety comes through is whether you get to that point and is that charging station working or not? And something we've experienced.
Which we'll talk about.
And I think as soon as you have that happen once in your mind, it just keeps on playing in your mind. And that's human nature. I don't think it has anything to do with the technology, with the infrastructure. You have one bad experience and you typically, it's just human nature typically to... For it to always be at the back of your mind.
And Greg, how's the landscape looking like from where you sit with the knowledge that you have, the integration, the evolution of EVs? How does the landscape look like for long trips in terms of range? Is it getting better? Are we getting more stations every year? You know, is our anxiety, are they working on our anxiety?
Are they working on our anxiety? Absolutely. I think, as I said, it's such an important and opportunistic time for the country to adopt to this. When you ask about the charging infrastructure, I often get asked, but how long does it take to charge? I'm only going to spend 10 minutes to put some fuel in my car before I travel on again in my journey. I think we are tending towards a situation where it'll be faster to charge your car to give you at least 300, 400 kilometers of range than it would be to actually refuel your car. But we're not there yet. But we're on a trajectory to get there, and this is the transformation that the country is going through. I think it's also important for people to be aware that we have what's called fast chargers and slow chargers. It's quite an important distinction because, like Kaval said, you look to charge your phone, but you don't plug your phone in and you sit and wait for your phone to finish charging by staring at it and waste the hour that you would have taken to charge that phone. So what's emerging in the retail environment is called destination charging. And it's a key phrase because it'll be wherever you are or wherever you need to be. In future, there will most likely be a set of charging stations available to you to plug your car in while you do your hours shopping, or while you go to a movie for 2 hours, or while you go to a restaurant for 45 minutes. That's what's going to start becoming more and more prevalent. But those are slow charges. You plug in and you charge your car from 60% to 75% or from 30% to 50%. You don't necessarily have to charge to full every time you go and recharge. And that's the mindset change that I think we as a nation and as a nation of drivers will need to go through. So just understand that it's more about this term, always be charging, whenever you have an opportunity, whether it's at a destination or whether it's at home, and we can unpack home charging a little bit more as well. Or when you do that road trip, then you know that you've got the comfort of those stations coming up.
So we're saying that, I like you can plug it in for a few hours and grab a coffee and in a mall, go shopping, whatever the case may be. You speak of fast charge. Are we then saying that there is that option when you go on longer range of trips? Okay.
And I think that's the crucial emerging network rollout that we're going to see. A very similar analogy to this is how the mobile networks rolled out in early 90s, Vodacom and MTN.
Yes.
They took the risk to build the base stations out before the phones were out, in a sense. They kind of built the network hoping that customers would come. We're in a very similar situation now where we've got a couple of very, very entrepreneurial companies. Gridcars really is the one that's built out the network that most of us are using and are familiar with. Rubicon is a very close alternative, also rolling out their network of EV charging stations. But there's some exciting ones on the horizon. Chargify, Zero Carbon Charge, which is building a network of off-grid, renewable energy-powered, solar-based charging stations. Meaning
so there's a variety.
There's a variety of options coming out there, and all of them are gearing towards not expecting you to wait more than 20 to 30 minutes doing a long road trip to do a recharge. And that 20, 30 minutes you would use anyway for a bio break, a coffee break, getting the kids to play a little bit. It's not going to be too disruptive to your journey.
Okay. And as we walked in, I couldn't help but notice that, of course, no prices for guessing that you are actually driving an electric vehicle.
Yes.
How does the charging option for home work? Because I always think, sure, if I have to drive this car and I plug into my plug at home, my house will blow up or something.
No, it's a valid question, and it's always probably one of the key questions to engage with at a dealership or even prior to considering your purchase of the car. There's some homework to be done around that. So there's a couple of options there, Lebo. The first one is you can buy what's called a portable or a very, very slow charger, which plugs into your 3-prong plug in your garage.
Sure.
Comes with a little unit, and then it plugs into the AC port of your car. The caveat with that is that it will take about 10 hours to charge overnight to give you potentially around about 120 kilometers of range. So it's very slow charging. But again, you're not driving overnight. You can let your car charge overnight quite comfortably. What's more of a better option, and to Keval's point on solar, if you've installed solar at home, you are 90% of the way there to having e-mobility work for you in your personal life.
Sure.
Because if you can then use any surplus energy that your solar is producing off your roof, if you cannot export that to the grid for a credit, and your battery at home is charged full, there's nowhere to put that energy. So your solar won't produce more than it needs for the house. But if you plug your car in, and your solar is now producing more than it needs, all that clean solar energy can go straight into your car, and you're effectively manufacturing your own electric fuel for free at home.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Keval, sustainability right there.
I think the key there, right, again, it requires behavioral change.
Yes.
Okay. When you are when you're at the office and you come home in the evening, then that's going to drain from your battery pack, right? So typically, you need to find that balance of how do you optimize your solar throughout your lifestyle. So all your high utilizing appliances, your pool pumps, your air cons, if you want to cool the home down, let that be done during the day. Your washing machines, your dishwashers, that needs to be, you need to utilize that power during the day. Then let the sun in the afternoon charge those batteries up to 100%, so that when you do come home, to Greg's point, you're charging for free.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then when we start looking at the cost of the entire ecosystem of comparing ICE to EVs, right? That's your perfect use case of
Absolutely.
when this makes sense for you in its entire life stage of that specific asset.
Super. Okay, I just, yes,
If
Greg,
I
do
may
you want
just
to maybe add to
add
that?
one point to that, I think it's critical for people to know that you do not need to charge your car every day for the next road trip. The ranges of the EVs now are typically 350 to 500 kilometers of range from a single charge. So if you do have that hybrid working opportunity and you can spend a day at home a week, and it's a sunny day, you may only need to charge your car once a week.
Okay, and it just I just thought of a quick one. You know, my mom always says that, you know, you need to let your phone battery run out before you charge it, or else you are ruining it. I don't know where that thinking came from.
Yes.
Would it be the same though for an EV? Do you need to wait for it to drain out? Hopefully, you're not in the middle of nowhere.
No, it's a great question, Lebo. In fact, no. The answer is no. The
Okay.
battery management systems and the battery chemistries and the lithium ion, what they call lithium ion NMC, is so sophisticated now that it completely controls the charging rate and the management of the storage of the energy in the battery over a period of time.
Okay.
So typically it gives you a very fast charging rate. If you're at a DC charger on a trip to Durban, that 20% to 80% will be at the full speed that the DC charger can provide. But then it will slow it right down so that it doesn't degrade the battery
quality of
or
the
the quality of the
battery.
battery.
Okay.
And it's a very, very important point, because now what we're talking about is a thing called state of health of the battery. You've heard of state of charge of the battery, which is the current charge that the range that the car has. But state of health, every time you check the state of health of the battery, you can see, is it at 99% of the original capacity of the battery? Or if I'm abusing the charging process and I take it to 100% every time, is that degrading over time? And that state of health will impact the residual value of the future value of that vehicle. And I think that's also a shift that the industry is going to have to make, because you don't have the wear and tear on a non-existent engine anymore, but you do have the potential wear and tear on a battery, which through the right user behavior, you can actually prolong the life of the battery and still have a 95% plus capacity in that battery after 5 to 10 years of driving it.
Which leads me to a very important one in terms of maintenance. Another sort of, you know, contention point when it comes to EVs. The cost of maintenance. You know, do you maintain the battery? How much does it cost you? What does the total cost of ownership look like for an NEV or an EV versus an ICE?
Yeah, so a few things to take into account, right? So number one, when you're looking at maintenance and service plans, as an example, right? There's no oil changes typically. There's no wear and tear typically on your EVs. So cost saver there from an annual cost perspective. When you start looking at the likes of insurance, let's take a step back and look at insurance holistically, right? Insurance is always there in place to protect you and is always risk-based from a pricing perspective, and always looking at determining what that replacement value typically could be of that vehicle. So the higher the value you insure something, the more you'd pay. So if you had to go like for like at two vehicles, both at, call it R1 million, one being a ICE vehicle, one being an EV, you typically would see the price from an insurance perspective today very similar, right? In the future, and we're starting to see insurance companies change this typically to be more expensive on insuring EVs. And the reason for that is with regards to the components of that vehicle and the replacement of it. So typically,
which Greg
if
spoke
the
about just now,
100%, right? Typically looking at that battery, if you're in an accident and there's damage to that battery and you need to replace that entire battery, that becomes more expensive. So your premium becomes more expensive, right? Because that risk is higher. In the future, what we're starting to see is in the battery technology space that you'd be able to change cells within the battery. and not the entire component itself.
Okay.
Greg, I'm not sure if you want to expand on some of the other typical maintenance costs.
No, sure. I think the maintenance question is a very big one that weighs on many consumers' minds when considering even looking at a new energy vehicle. A typical hybrid vehicle goes through the same maintenance cycle as a petrol engine. You take it in once a year. It's got a maintenance plan or a motor plan. Oil changes are done. A little battery diagnostic test is probably done as well, but that's all you really get from a hybrid or a plug-in hybrid. But on the battery electric side, I mean, the maintenance really is as simple as doing a battery diagnostic, looking at the state of health of the battery, looking at the cell integrity, look if there's been any damage through maybe going through an undercarriage kind of obstruction, but you would not notice that in any case. They will give you that report. And the only other thing that they do in a service on an EV is change your window washer fluid. That's the extent of it. And I know for my own purposes, I take my EV in once every 2 years for a service. So, but that's part of the motor plan. I think the other key question I get asked is, but what about replacing the battery, after a certain period of time? And when I do replace it, where does that battery end up? And I think that's a critical misconception maybe just to address, because the batteries that are being put into the EVs today typically have between an 8 to 10 year warranty.
Okay.
So you've got peace of mind for 8 years that if there's any kind of failure or integrity with that battery, the OEM that actually provides that battery will do the replacement for you.
So the warranty of the battery comes with the car from
Absolutely.
the OEM,
Absolutely.
guaranteed. Okay.
And that's also a key factor when looking at the second-hand market as well. If you've got a 2018 model, you're looking at, okay, I've got 2 or 3 years left on the warranty of that battery. But the good news actually is that these batteries are lasting far longer than 8 years. I've seen examples of Teslas in the UK that are well over 10 to 12 years old now, that have done well over 300,000 miles. That's almost close to 500,000 kilometers. And the battery state of health has still got the integrity. It's still at 85% plus, and you're still getting very good range from them. And I think just to say that what's so important is that when that battery eventually does become unusable for mobility, there is such a big supply chain and value chain that's building around recycling and repurposing of these batteries. To take the battery out the vehicle, refurbish it, repurpose it, and put it into stationary storage. It may well end up in a DC charging station on a highway, storing energy from the sun that is going to be used to recharge the EVs that are driving past it, for example.
So there's possibilities of recycling it. It's not going to end up in a landfill somewhere in a spoiled environment.
That's the thing. That was just the repurposing and refurbishing, but the recycling, if it eventually becomes unusable in that application, then recycling is your last option. And the good news again is that there's some really, really good examples worldwide of what's called urban mining, for companies to reclaim the critical minerals out of those batteries and remake new batteries from them. Because it's just the interface between the cathode and the anode that degrades, not the minerals themselves. So we're not polluting the environment by putting these on landfills. The full circular economy is in place.
That's an important one. I mean, I think music to your ears from a sustainability point of view, Keval.
Lebo, I've also had the question come through so many times in terms of, is an EV actually more sustainable than an ICE vehicle, right? Because the guys typically today are worried about the mining process of all the minerals that are going into the battery, lithium, cobalt, nickel, etc., right? And a few studies have shown that if you're looking at the entire lifespan of that asset, from the manufacturing process all the way to the end of its life versus an ICE vehicle, you need to think about, in an ICE vehicle, you are filling fuel every 500, 600, 700 Ks, right? So when you start taking that into account over that lifespan, right, your EV is typically more sustainable. There's always these discussions and challenges around mining practices, right? The labor, child labor,
which is everywhere
labor,
across all industries.
It's across everything, right? It's not specific to a mobility or vehicle sort of manufacturing industry. that is something that is general and across the board. So we need to typically start looking at how do we ensure that we look at policy, that we look at how to regulate some of these elements, how that we ensure the circular economy that Greg spoke about is creating a proper sustainable business or economy rather. For everyone to start adopting.
And I mean, you spoke about certain things that the government is doing to accelerate the adoption of EVs in the space that you're in. How's that looking?
The government walks a very fine line in terms of balancing various interests of various parties and consumer interests. And I think you'll see in countries where we don't have an automotive manufacturing presence, it's far easier to create consumer incentives to draw imports of new vehicle technologies into those countries.
Okay.
For example, like in Norway, even in Australia now for that matter. But in South Africa, we have a unique and very positive situation in that we have 7 original equipment manufacturers with plant operations based in South Africa. And we want to protect that environment and grow it as much as possible. But we cannot put that industry at risk by promoting, I'd say, too much of an importer's balanced model when we want to also promote a manufacturer-based model. So that's the government's fine line to walk, to create incentives for the OEMs in South Africa to think about making EVs and NEVs for domestic consumption, because around 65 to 70% of the vehicles made in South Africa are for the export market. But the OEMs overseas that are looking at South Africa also have to make decisions to say, we want to put the new model of EV production into Kariga or into Pretoria or into Durban, but we won't do that unless there's a sufficient demand on the South African side for those products. So the kind of thing that we're seeing is that potentially there could be some tax rebates or incentives, and this is really just under consideration. No commitment, no timeline's been given. But it has to be a healthy balance to make it more affordable for the lower end of the market, under the 500,000 Rand range, to be affordable. But at the same time, entice the manufacturers to make those products domestically for that market that is emerging at the same time.
And I mean, from an accessibility point of view, creating those access points going forward will be quite important. Keval?
This topic about localization, label, so critical, right? Because it speaks to access. It speaks to how we're helping the economy. And you're looking at this automotive industry, right? If you look at our, from the automotive industry, and if you look at our export market, about 12.5% is contributed from the automotive industry. Contributes to about 4% of our GDP, right? So how do we start looking at innovative ways to ensure that there's sustainability in the fiscus in order for us to ensure continued growth here? That for me is going to help drive the localization, it's going to help drive the economy, it's going to help ultimately for us to be more sustainable and help our clients transition to net zero ultimately.
Yeah, and there's a couple of other players in this ecosystem. I mean, we haven't even touched on the fuel and energy companies in South Africa that also have to think about the transition to be made.
True.
The
value chain.
The value chain. It's great for consumers to reduce your fuel bill, but the net effect of that is less domestic sales of fuel. The other positive aspect is perhaps the importing of fuel goes down. So the trade deficit balance that South Africa has with the importing of fuel is positively impacted.
Sure.
But to what detriment?
There will be trade-offs. Yeah,
there's trade-offs.
It's a balancing game.
And the minerals and the mining opportunity that comes with potential manufacturing of the next generation of batteries. Keval mentioned nickel, manganese, cobalt, lithium. There's a new chemistry just around the corner. It's called lithium phosphate.
Sure.
And there's another one called sodium ion.
Yeah.
Then there's solid states. The roadmap of battery evolution is exponentially changing, and it's all coming out of China. Those are the world leaders right now.
Interesting. A two-pronged one.
Can you imagine though, like to Greg's point, sodium, right? It's salt water.
Yes.
Can you imagine that being
the source.
used as
the
energy
minerals
into
and
the car,
source
yeah.
in your battery.
Interesting times ahead, right?
Evolution and innovation. I love
But
it.
I want to put this one on the table, and any one of you can take it. It's actually a two-prong one, simple one. Really, are we ready in South Africa in terms of adoption?
Let me answer it technically, and then maybe from a user perspective, you answer it, Keval. But technically, as Keval said, we have around about 500 or so charging stations on the national highways covering South Africa. But what's not reported are the home charges within that environment and the potential destination charges that are emerging at retail points. When you start adding those in, I think the answer is absolutely we are already, from a technical perspective, tracking the number of charging points available to the number of vehicles that we have at the moment.
Okay.
And as that grows, we'll start to see the charging points grow at the same time. And we'll see hopefully the circular economy evolving around the sustainable home when people can make the two work together. I think the critical mass needs to start in the urban areas with affordable vehicles, where people get comfortable with just doing the short trips, without having the long trip range anxiety in their minds. Over time, you start learning, getting more comfortable with the car, start venturing out a bit further. And when you do, you will inevitably be able to plan a trip with an EV charge station along the way to do that.
So we're certainly making progress, I think. Keval, you want to touch on the consumer aspect, and that's exactly what I wanted to find out. Is Jimmy down the road, ordinary South African, who's got a 9-to-5 job, has enough money to look after his family? What does that landscape look like for an ordinary South African from a consumer point of view?
Look, Lebo, in my mind, it's important we meet South Africans where they're at in their own sustainability or transitional journey. In my mind, are we ready? I think there's still many unknowns. Okay. And the reason for that is Greg mentioned that if you look at the charging infrastructure and you look at the current adoption of EVs, tick, we there.
There's a match.
There's a match. Happy, we can continue. As this thing grows, we must ensure that infrastructure grows with it. We mustn't be fooled today in terms of our energy security.
As a whole.
If you look at currently the utility provider, right, in terms of increases, in terms of how they want to look at tariff restructuring, I'm slightly concerned in that space. And I'm also slightly concerned in terms of whether we have the right energy infrastructure to support mass adoption. Right?
So
today,
that's the bigger concern.
Transmission, distribution of energy today, when you look at the landscape, that for me is where it becomes a little bit iffy, to say the least. And the reasoning behind that is, Lebo, Greg, imagine if we have this mass adoption over the next 3 to 5 years, right, without infrastructure being maintained. The distribution infrastructure, transmission infrastructure of energy of the local grid, if you're not utilizing solar, and utilizing a lot of these charges that are not done through renewables, and you're utilizing the grid, we can very quickly go and
go back to basics.
and shut down the grid or shut down areas, and then it mustn't be another load shedding situation, right? So we must ensure that we're doing this responsibly. Private sector is really getting involved in terms of, if you look at the energy availability factor that the utility is providing, that hasn't significantly improved over the last 2 years, right? What's happened is private sector has invested a lot to ensure that there's alternatives.
And demand has come down.
Yeah.
So essentially we're saying that, the vehicles are there in terms of the different options. Consumers have options. The infrastructure is improving. So there's a match between the vehicles that are available and the infrastructure, short trip, long trip, whatever the case may be. So there is comfort there. Yeah. The biggest point of contention is sustainability from an SA 101 point of view, in terms of the level of energy and maintenance of this infrastructure, if I'm hearing correctly.
That's where largely my concerns would come through. I think it's important for each individual to do their homework, right? Is this right for you? Going to Greg's earlier point about, utilizing this, if you're working hybrid, if you've got solar at home, this becomes automatically, it becomes a no-brainer because there's automatically a return on investment from day one, right? When you look at this lifespan of that asset. So you need to figure out where you are on this journey. You need to understand the pros and cons that we've discussed. And is it right for you? And if it is, absolutely,
Greg, do you want to weigh in there?
Just to build on that, I think it's so important to, what Kaval's saying, to ask yourself where you are in your sustainability journey in life. Because there's a bit of a trigger moment that happened for me. And I'll just share what that was. It's when I became aware of what a unit of energy actually means. And a unit of energy in technical terms is a kilowatt hour. At home, you'll be paying your electrical bill to Eskom. You are paying for a certain consumption of kilowatt hours per month. Many of us probably have no idea what appliances and what loads in our house are generating the demand for those kilowatt hours as energy consumers. And I think one practical tip I would give to a consumer is to understand what does your house consume? What do you consume as an energy consumer? If you're running your washing machine at night, you're drawing off Eskom. You're paying probably 3 or 4 kilowatt hours of energy for that privilege to do that. But if you become more aware of what a kilowatt hour is, then it starts to become more easy to understand what e-mobility means. Because vehicles run on kilowatt hours. That's the energy unit that you're putting into your vehicle and your car as well. So the two worlds of home consumption for energy and your transport consumption are no longer kilowatt hours and fuel, liters of fuel, it's kilowatt hours and kilowatt hours. And when those worlds come together, you can start to understand and plan a bit further and understand what costs you can save and how you can actually apply, those principles to your life of sustainability.
We've seen this innovation. We've seen how quickly things change. So it's not that it's not coming. It's about when are you ready to jump on the bandwagon to get there.
Interesting. Like anything else, I suppose.
Yeah, are you an early adopter or late adopter?
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
Interesting. Really interesting. Well, thank you, gentlemen. A very insightful discussion and certainly lots to learn. There you have it. EVs, pros and cons. Do your research. There is certainly hope in terms of the variety of vehicles that are available. The infrastructure is taking a notch up every year. And as consumers, the onus is up to you to obviously lean in on lots of education that is circulating around. We will certainly be part of that education journey with you. Do make time to check out some of the highlights of the EV tour that we covered on some of our social media pages. It's been an interesting one, and I do hope that it has given you some comfort in as far as EVs are concerned. Thank you. Thanks for listening. We hope that you found that useful. Now go and subscribe to be notified when our next informative episode is available.